Laughter filled the grand amphitheater of the Galactic Coalition. Sharp, grating, dismissive laughter that drowned out the sound of a coming catastrophe. They mocked a tiny human battalion as a rounding error in a war that was supposed to end civilizations. 30 hours later, every one of them would remember that laughter as the last sound they made before going completely, permanently silent. Sirens wailed across the obsidian spires of Aegis Prime, their mournful frequency bleeding through the reinforced glass of the Coalition High Command Center. Inside, the air was thick enough to choke on recycled oxygen, the pheromone stink of a dozen terrified species crammed into one chamber. Holographic tactical displays bathed the room in a pulsing, sickly crimson, charting a disaster on a galactic scale. General Alexios Smith stood at the edge of the central hollow table, spine straight as a blade, face unreadable. His dark green uniform, plain and unadorned next to the glowing ceremonial medals favored by Coalition brass, made him look like a shadow standing among peacocks. Beside him, Captain Alina Campbell tracked the shifting red tide across the map with the flat, analytical calm of someone reading a weather report. The two of them were the entirety of Earth's presence, representatives of a system that had held provisional coalition membership for barely 3 years. At the head of the table loomed Supreme Commander Bartholomew, a colossus from the Groxian systems. The translation matrix rendered his name into something a human tongue could manage, but there was nothing human about the 4 arms or the slate-gray exoskeleton beneath his ceremonial plating. He slammed one massive fist onto the holotable, and the projection convulsed. "This is unacceptable." His translated voice carried an artificial bass that rattled through the chamber. "The enemy vanguard has broken the outer ring. Warlord Dominic is bringing nearly 40 million combatants to our door." 40 million. Director Tyler Mitchell, the senior human liaison, a man who'd spent his entire career smoothing himself into coalition bureaucracy until barely anything human was left showing, wiped sweat from his brow with a shaking hand. "Our lines on the Typhon Ridge are already crumbling. The reserve fleets are 6 cycles out." He turned toward the Supreme Commander, voice trembling. "The planetary shield holds another 20 hours if we reroute the 7th and 9th Armored Divisions into the valley." "The 7th and 9th are already spent, Director." General Smith's voice cut in, level and unhurried, a strange calm against the panic saturating the room. "Their batteries are dry, their morale is broken. Sending them into Typhon Valley isn't a defense, it's an execution." Bartholomew swiveled his multi-eyed gaze toward Smith, contempt radiating off every line of his massive frame. "And what does the delegate from the dirt world propose? You sit here, General, watching our war like a spectator at a play. Your government promised military aid to earn its seat at this table. Where is it?" Smith stepped into the crimson light of the hologram and tapped a sequence into his data pad, pushing Earth's deployment manifest onto the main server. "The United Earth Directorate has authorized a full expeditionary force. They made planetfall on the dark side of Aegis Prime 20 minutes ago. They'll be in position at Typhon Valley within 3 hours." A ripple of murmurs swept the chamber, fragile, desperate hope kindling in the eyes of alien commanders who had watched Warlord Dominic's forces. A savage collective known as the Scourge grind through star system after star system without ever once being stopped. If this unknown quantity of a species had been hiding a fleet, maybe, just maybe, there was still a way out of this. Bartholomew leaned over the console and pulled up the troop manifest himself. His eyes tracked down the numbers. And then, slowly, the tension bled out of his enormous frame and was replaced by something else entirely. A low, rolling sound the translation matrix took a beat too long to identify as laughter. He threw his head back, mandibles clacking with uncontained amusement, and it spread through the room like fire through dry grass. Officers of staggering size and technological might, one after another, dissolved into open mockery. The command center, A tomb of dread a moment earlier became a theater of contempt. 50,000, Bartholomew wheezed, wiping fluid from his primary eyes. You've brought us 50,000 infantry, General. Warlord Dominic's vanguard alone is 5 million strong. His war beasts are the size of your dropships. His plasma casters melt mountainsides. And your gift to this war is 50,000 mammals made of flesh and bone. Tyler Mitchell buried his face in his hands. Alexios, he hissed, please tell me this is only the vanguard. Tell me the rest is holding in slipspace. This is the entirety of the force we deemed necessary, Smith replied, his voice never rising, never cracking, meeting every mocking stare in the room with total indifference. Numbers don't win wars, Supreme Commander. Discipline does. Firepower does. Adaptability does. We don't need 50 million bodies to hold a valley. You are arrogant, human. Bartholomew's laughter curdled into something colder. Your toy army will be ash before the sun sets. We'll place them at the very front of Typhon Valley. If you're so confident they can serve as a speed bump, buy my real soldiers time to fall back. Understood. Smith snapped a crisp salute and turned to a leaner. Captain Campbell, signal the vanguard. Tell them they've got the front line. Yes, sir. Her eyes carried a flicker of something dangerously close to hunger. As they walked out through the echoing laughter still ringing off the chamber walls, she leaned toward him. They really have no idea, do they, General? The corner of Smith's mouth twitched, the barest suggestion of a smile. No, Captain, they don't, but they will. Typhon Valley was a nightmare carved out of geography. 10 miles of jagged obsidian and loose, treacherous shale, boxed in on both sides by mountains too steep to climb. It was the single overland route to the capital, which made it the only choke point that mattered. Tyler Mitchell arrived by hover skiff expecting to find towering energy barricades, glowing plasma shields, hulking war mechs squaring off for a last stand. What he found was mud. The humans hadn't touched the Coalition's standard energy projectors. Instead, 30,000 engineers and infantry had spent 3 hours tearing the Earth apart with an efficiency that looked almost choreographed. A sprawling, overlapping network of deep trenches, reinforced with fast-curring polycrete and crowned with razor wire. It looked primitive. It looked like something out of a history archive nobody bothered reading anymore. Tyler stepped off the skiff and sank ankle-deep in churned soil, his expensive Coalition boots instantly ruined. He wound through the camp, dodging squads of soldiers who barely came up to the chest of a standard Coalition trooper. Coalition infantry stood 8 feet tall in glowing power armor, hauling energy cannons that could level a building. The humans wore flat, light-swallowing composite suits, faces hidden behind opaque visors, carrying blocky, heavy weapons of cold steel and carbon fiber that fired primitive metal slugs instead of elegant plasma. He found General Smith and Captain Campbell in a subterranean bunker, bent over an actual paper map lit by harsh LED strips. Alexios, you have to call this off, Tyler's voice cracked. I just flew the length of your line, not one active shield. You've put infantry in holes in the ground. Dominic's forces carry wide dispersion thermal detonators. Your men will cook alive down there. Eleanor didn't glance up from her compass. Thermal detonators go off on impact, Director. Sink the troops below grade, angle the trench walls 45 degrees off vertical, and the blast wave rolls straight over the top. Basic fluid dynamics. And the weapons, Tyler gestured, half frantic, at a soldier hauling a belt-fed machine gun past them. Kinetic slugs against Scourge reactive armor. Those bullets will bounce off them like rain. The whole Coalition Council is watching this by satellite right now, Alexios. They're taking bets on how many minutes it takes for your army to be erased. They're laughing at us. Smith finally lifted his eyes to meet Tyler's. Let them laugh. The Coalition fights like gentlemen standing in open fields behind glowing shields, trading energy bolts until somebody's battery dies. They fight with math. We fight with physics, a pause, and we fight dirty. Before Tyler could push further, a low, rhythmic tremor rolled through the dirt walls of the bunker. Faint at first, a shiver in the soles of their boots, then building until loose earth began sifting from the ceiling. Seismic sensors are lighting up, General, a comms officer called from the corner. Dominic's vanguard has entered the valley mouth. Estimated 4,200,000 hostiles, heavy mechanized support. Distance 8 kilometers closing. Show me, Smith said. The wall screen flared to life with drone footage of the valley mouth, and Tyler stumbled back a step. The horizon had vanished under a tidal wave of biological and mechanical horror. Insected bipeds sheathed in rust-thick armor rode atop six-legged siege beasts the size of buildings, hooves splintering boulders with every stride. The heat shimmer of 1,000,000 charging plasma weapons rippled above the horde, which moved with an eerie, unbroken synchronization, a wall of death stretching past the edge of the camera's view. General, Eleanor said, her voice dropping into something cold and precise. Target-rich environment. Smith checked his chronometer. Hold all fire, let them adv. Ants to the 3-kilometer mark. I want them deep inside the kill box. He glanced at Tyler. Director, you may want to cover your ears. High above, in orbit, the mocking laughter of coalition observers climbed toward a crescendo as they watched the human line stay dark. No shields glowing, no plasma batteries humming. 50,000 soldiers had folded themselves into the earth entirely, weapons resting on sandbags, waiting. To Dominic's sensors, there was no enemy at all, just an abandoned valley. His commanders, reading no energy signatures, assumed the coalition had already fled. The horde surged forward, breaking into a ground-shattering charge, racing for an undefended capital. At 4 kilometers, the earth trembled. At 3.5, the roar of the horde became deafening. At exactly 3 kilometers, General Alexios Smith pressed a single physical red button. Fire. The world didn't end with the elegant hum of plasma. It ended in a deafening, chest-crushing roar that tore the sky itself apart. 10 miles behind the human line, hidden in the folds of the Typhon Mountains, Earth had planted its trump card. 300 self-propelled heavy artillery platforms. No laser cannons bleeding their energy across distance. These were 155mm howitzers and magnetic railguns, firing depleted uranium armor-piercing shells and high-explosive fragmentation rounds. On Smith's order, all 300 guns fired at once. The sound alone was a physical blow, a concussive wave that shattered the windows of Tyler's parked skiff and sent coalition observers in orbit reeling as their audio sensors overloaded. For 5 unbearable seconds, the sky over Typhon Valley went black with thousands of tons of falling steel and explosive, arcing down in perfectly calculated parabolas. Then it landed. The vanguard of Dominic's army, an unstoppable tide of armored flesh a moment before, simply stopped existing. The ground erupted in a wall of fire and shattered alien plating. The Scourge's kinetic reactive armor, engineered to shrug off small arms fire, had no answer for 100-pound shells arriving at supersonic speed. In the High Command Center, the laughter died in an instant. The tactical map, a solid red mass moments earlier, now showed a gaping hole punched through its heart. What just happened? Bartholomew stammered, 4 arms frozen mid-gesture, staring at the drone feed. Energy spikes, plasma yields. None, Supreme Commander, a terrified sensor operator answered, hands flying over his console. No energy signatures at all, it's purely kinetic. They're throwing metal at them, but the velocity, the force, it's tearing the Scourge apart. Down in the valley, the barrage didn't pause. It rolled forward. The humans called it a creeping barrage, a wall of explosions advancing exactly 100 yards every 60 seconds, grinding through anything in its path. The Scourge, bred for open warfare and utterly unprepared for an enemy they couldn't even see, broke into panic. Their siege beasts, deafened and terrified, bucked and trampled their own ranks. The charge collapsed into a desperate, chaotic scramble. "They're bunching up," Eliner noted, watching the thermal returns, "trying to push through the barrage." "Let them," Smith said. "Signal the infantry, weapons free." As the survivors, still hundreds of thousands strong, stumbled out of the smoke expecting to crush a handful of cowering mammals underfoot, 50,000 human soldiers rose out of the mud at once. No war cry, no charge. With cold, mechanical discipline, they laid heavy machine guns, rifles, and anti-materiel weapons across the parapets and opened fire. The sound was a continuous, tearing roar, like canvas ripping apart on an impossible scale. Tracer fire lit the smoke in red streaks. The humans employed something the coalition had no framework for: interlocking fields of fire, every squad covering the blind spot of the next, weaving an invisible net of lead and tungsten that nothing could pass through untouched. The front ranks of the Scourge fell in windrows, their armor sparking and cracking under sustained fire, while vehicle-mounted railguns in the pillboxes tracked the siege beasts and dropped them mid-stride, hypersonic tungsten rods punching clean through skulls built to survive artillery. Tyler watched through the bunker periscope, jaw slack. He had spent his career listening to the coalition sneer at humanity's crude reliance on physical weapons and old-world logistics, and he had believed them. He had been ashamed of his own species' military. Watching the valley now, he finally understood. The coalition fought to preserve an aesthetic: clean weapons, no mess. Humanity had spent 10,000 years turning geography and steel into a machine built for one purpose only. "They're flanking," Eliner called, pointing at the map. "Dominic's shifting 100,000 troops toward the eastern ridge, trying to go down the trench line." "Right into the pre-cited coordinates," Smith said, unbothered. "Signal the air wing, give them the napalm." Out of the low cloud cover dropped a squadron of atmospheric strike craft. Ugly, blunt, deafening things the coalition would never have called elegant. They screamed low over the eastern ridge and released a payload the wider galaxy had outlawed generations ago as too cruel to use. Liquid fire bloomed across the ridge, and the Scourge caught in it shrieked as the jellied fuel clung to their armor and cooked them alive inside it. The smell of burning alien flesh drifted down into the trenches below. In the command center, nobody made a sound. Bartholomew stared at the screen, mandibles hanging open. 50,000 humans, the joke they'd been laughing at hours earlier, had not only stopped an army of 4 million. They were dismantling it methodically, without ever breaking formation. Tyler's voice cracked through the secure channel into the silent chamber. "This is Director Mitchell. General Smith sends his regards and requests you move your reserve fleets into orbit to seal off the enemy's retreat." Bartholomew swallowed. "They're retreating." His voice had dropped to a whisper. "Dominic's forces have never retreated." "Yes, sir." There was something new in Tyler's voice now, pride unmistakable. "The Scourge are breaking." The tiny army held the line. High above the slaughter, aboard a dreadnought that dwarfed the local moon, Warlord Dominic watched his vanguard die. The Scourge Collective had no concept of fear in the way most species understood it. Their drive was purely biological, an imperative to consume and conquer without hesitation. But as the telemetry streamed in, something cold and unfamiliar moved through Dominic's neural web. An army that had swallowed 3 star systems whole and shattered the coalition's finest shielded phalanxes was being turned to biological paste by a species that hadn't achieved faster-than-light travel a century ago. His mandibles flared with fury. The humans fought without honor, burrowing in the dirt like vermin, striking from beyond sight with crude, exploding metal, refusing the grand open formations that defined civilized warfare. If they wanted to fight in the mud, Dominic decided, he would drown them in it. "Initiate the vanguard drop," he hissed, subharmonics translating instantly across his bridge. "Target their subterranean networks directly. Bypass the artillery. crush them in their own holes. Back on Aegis Prime, the tactical display shifted, a constellation of jagged blue icons appearing high in the atmosphere, dropping fast. Tyler's knuckles went white against the table's edge. General, orbital sensors are reading massive thermal blooms. They're launching drop pods straight from orbit, hundreds of thousands of them, coming down right on top of your trench network. Bartholomew's brief calm shattered. They've breached your perimeter, General. The Scourge are the finest close-quarters killers in the galaxy. Their exoskeletons crush Coalition power armor. You've packed your unshielded troops into a confined space with them. You've dug your own grave. Smith didn't move. Crimson light from the falling drop pods washed across a face carved from a decade of studying human conflict, and he didn't call for retreat, didn't summon the reserve fleets. He simply checked the heavy mechanical watch on his wrist and straightened his cuffs. "Supreme Commander," he said, calm as still water, "have you ever studied Earth's early industrial-era wars?" Bartholomew stared, thrown by the sheer absurdity of the question amid the chaos. "What?" "No, it's irrelevant." Smith turned away from him entirely toward a leaner. "The Scourge are taking the bait, Captain. Execute protocol fatal funnel. Let's show them why we prefer tight spaces." "With pleasure, sir." A predatory grin crossed her face as she opened the comm channel. "All infantry, this is command. Hostiles incoming, danger close. Fix bayonets, switch to close quarters loadouts. Welcome to the meat grinder, boys." Down in the valley, the sky screamed. Massive spike drop pods slammed into the churned trench network with the force of falling meteors, throwing geysers of mud, stone, and shredded wire hundreds of feet skyward. Before the debris had even settled, the pods cracked open and released the true horror of the Scourge, not the mindless infantry that had opened the battle, but Dominic's elite. 9-foot mutated shock troops, double-plated, armed with scythe limbs built to cleave through shielding and bulkhead alike. They roared, expecting to find terrified mammals begging for their lives. Instead, they found themselves trapped in a nightmare of angles. The human trenches weren't simple ditches. They were killing floors, engineered in a tight zigzag that killed any line of sight past 20 yards, comfortable for a 6-foot human, suffocating for a 9-foot behemoth, able to swing its scythe limbs without burying them in the trench wall, unable to charge without tripping over its own turns. And at every blind corner, the humans were waiting. Major William Caldwell, a veteran of the United Earth Directorate, stood knee-deep in freezing mud, breath fogging in the cold. His weapon looked like something the Coalition would have filed under obsolete, a pump-action 12-gauge, its barrel reinforced with tungsten carbide, the faded stamp of a long-defunct arms manufacturer on the receiver. A Scourge elite rounded the corner ahead of him, mandibles slick with saliva, and lunged with a claw meant to take his head off. Caldwell didn't retreat. He stepped into the creature's reach and fired point-blank. At 3 feet, the buckshot spread didn't matter. The raw kinetic force hit the alien's chest plate like a runaway train. Armor built to deflect grazing energy fire shattered under the blunt trauma, and the elite went down, its insides pulverized. "Clear," Caldwell bellowed over the roar of the trench. "Move up, don't let them get a foothold." All along the 10-mile line, a brutal, intimate symphony of violence played out. Flamethrowers turned corners into blast furnaces, cooking Scourge inside their own armor. Buried fragmentation mines sprang waist-high and shredded unarmored joints. The aliens, bred for open ground, panicked and tried to climb out, only to be cut down by machine guns waiting in the pillboxes above. There was nowhere left to go. In the high command center, the raw audio from the trenches bled through the speakers. The crack of shotguns, the roaring gasp of flamethrowers, the shrieks of the dying, and underneath it all, the eerily calm voices of human officers calling targets like they were reading a grocery list. Bartholomew took an unsteady step back from the table. The blue icons on the display Scourge drop pods were winking out at an exponential rate, not defeated, erased. "You," he said, barely a whisper, staring at Smith with something closer to dread than anger now. You knew they'd drop into your trenches. You wanted them there. Energy weapons are civilized, Supreme Commander. Smith's tone stayed conversational, like he was pointing out a rounding error on a spreadsheet. They cauterize. They dissipate over range. Kinetic warfare is a matter of pure physics. Trap a heavily armored enemy somewhere it can't use its size, add high-velocity fragmentation and fire, and the outcome becomes predictable. Tyler stared at his fellow human, finally grasping the full shape of it. The coalition fought to outlast an enemy. Humanity fought to erase one. They're trying to retreat, a sensor operator called, voice shaking. The vanguard's trying to dig out of the trench network, but the humans are pursuing. Sir, they're engaging hand-to-hand. Put it on the main screen, Smith said. The display flared with helmet cam footage, a blur of mud, blood, and rain. Caldwell had run dry on shells. Instead of pulling back, he and his squad had drawn heavy entrenching tools, serrated and honed to a razor edge. The footage showed him leap onto the back of a wounded elite and drive the spade straight into the unarmored neural cluster at the base of its skull. The creature collapsed, twitching. The humans didn't pause to celebrate. They tore their tools free, stepped over the body, and kept pushing forward, silent, methodical, merciless. Bartholomew wrapped all four arms around himself, an unconscious gesture of self-protection. General Smith, what kind of monsters does your world breed? The kind that survive, Smith said. The kind that survive. Warlord Dominic had never learned how to fail. In the sprawling record of his conquests, setbacks were minor corrections, fixed with overwhelming force. But as he watched his elite vanguard, the deadliest close-quarters killers in known space, cut apart with shotguns and shovels, something in his vast, ancient intellect began to crack. These humans weren't a rounding error. They were something else entirely, apex predators wearing the shape of something small and soft. Bring the dreadnought into low orbit, Dominic ordered, his voice rolling across the bridge as atmospheric friction alarms began screaming. Deploy the command crawler. I will break their center myself. I will crush their commanders, and the rest of these insects will scatter. In the subterranean bunker, the seismic sensors went haywire, needles slamming against their limits until the glass cracked. The ground itself seemed to groan in pain. General, Alina said, her calm finally slipping. Massive gravitational anomaly descending fast, bigger than anything they've fielded yet. Above the valley, the clouds tore open as a machine of impossible scale dropped through, retro thrusters boiling the rain to steam. The Scourge command crawler, a mobile fortress the size of an aircraft carrier, riding spiked treads that chewed straight through bedrock. Bristling with heavy plasma batteries, in its command blister rode Warlord Dominic himself. He's going for a decapitation strike, Tyler shouted, diving clear as dirt began raining from the bunker ceiling. Alexios, that thing carries a localized displacement shield. Your artillery can't touch it. We need to fall back. Smith stayed bent over the map, tracing the crawler's projected path. Evacuation is an inefficiency, Director. A captain goes down with his ship. A general holds his ground. He glanced up. Captain Campbell, is the package armed? Armed and tracking, sir. Alina's hands moved across her console, locking a targeting reticle onto the crawler's thermal signature. What package? Tyler demanded, coughing through the dust filling the bunker. The ground was shaking too hard to stand steady. The crawler's engines drowned out everything else, less than 2 miles out and closing fast, its treads tearing the valley floor apart. The coalition measures war in energy yields, Smith said, bracing himself against the table. They think enough power in a shield can stop anything. They forget every shield has a limit and every machine has a breaking point. We brought something built specifically for cracking open armored fortresses. We call it a bunker buster. 10 miles behind the line, a reinforced silo carved into the mountains hissed open. No artillery shell climbed out of it this time. A single missile, thick and black, rode a pillar of blinding exhaust into the sky. This wasn't conventional ordnance. It was a hypersonic kinetic penetrator tipped with a shaped depleted uranium charge and a tactical yield thermonuclear core, a weapon Earth's own treaties restricted to extinction-level threats only. The missile broke the stratosphere at Mach 15 before tipping over and painting the crawler with a laser designator. Inside the command blister, Dominic saw it coming on his tactical display and didn't flinch. His displacement shields had swallowed asteroid strikes before. A single missile was nothing. He laughed. It struck the crawler's roof, the weakest point on any armored hull. The shield flared violet, holding for a fraction of a millisecond as it tried to absorb the impact. Then the sheer mass and velocity of the depleted uranium tip punched a microscopic hole straight through it, and the thermonuclear core detonated behind it. The blast didn't bloom outward into a mushroom cloud. The shaped charge forced the entire yield straight down, a concentrated column of atomic fire that burned through 30 feet of armor plating in an instant. The shockwave shattered every remaining pane of glass in Typhon Valley and left everyone inside 5 miles temporarily deaf. A flash of light turned the dark, rain-soaked battlefield into stark, shadowless daylight. When the light faded, the command crawler was simply gone. In its place sat a glowing crater of molten slag, 50 yards deep and a quarter-mile wide. Warlord Dominic, a conqueror of 3 systems, the nightmare that had haunted the Coalition for a generation, had been reduced to subatomic particles by human engineering. A profound silence fell over the valley. The surviving scourge, still hundreds of thousands strong, simply stopped. Without Dominic's will anchoring their collective consciousness, their instincts reasserted themselves, and this time those instincts screamed only one thing: run. They looked at the molten crater. They looked at the mud-caked trenches still bristling with kinetic weapons. For the first time in their recorded history, the scourge broke ranks entirely. Weapons hit the ground. They turned and fled, a chaotic stampede of armored giants running from an army of mammals a fraction of their size. In the Coalition High Command, nobody spoke. Bartholomew stared at a tactical map gone empty, the crimson swarm that had threatened to erase their civilization dissolving into full retreat. Against every calculation the Coalition's finest strategists had run, Typhon Valley was secure. Slowly, Bartholomew turned to his comms console. "Prepare my transport," he said, and for the first time his voice carried no arrogance at all, only something small and humbled. "I need to speak with General Smith, in person." An hour later, a gold-plated Coalition transport skiff dropped into Typhon Valley, its ramp lowering into ankle-deep mud. Bartholomew stepped out flanked by his energy-shielded honor guard, and the contrast was almost violent. Gleaming armor and immaculate uniforms against a battlefield that looked like the end of the world. But as he walked through the human camp, the illusion of Coalition superiority cracked apart. The soldiers here were exhausted, caked head to toe in frozen mud, alien blood, and the soot of spent explosives. They sat bandaging wounds, field-stripping their weapons, drinking from dented canteens. They looked small, fragile. And yet, as the towering alien commander passed among them, not one of them flinched, or looked away. They watched him with the flat, unblinking eyes of people who had stared into an abyss and made the abyss look away first. A shiver ran the length of Bartholomew's exoskeleton. These were the true masters of war. General Smith and Captain Campbell stood waiting near the wreckage of a pillbox. Smith's dress uniform was ruined, caked with mud, but his posture hadn't lost an inch of its precision. Beside them, Tyler Mitchell stood a little taller than before, something new burning behind his eyes, the subservience he'd worn for years finally gone. Bartholomew stopped a few feet away and looked down at the small, fragile creature who had done all this. Then, slowly, deliberately, he crossed his 4 forearms over his chest and lowered his massive head, the highest gesture of respect his culture offered, reserved only for equals. "General Smith," his voice rumbled softly into the quiet valley, You told me your army would hold this valley. I laughed at you. I called you primitive. He looked around at the smoking craters, the endless trenches, the scale of devastation 50,000 humans had carved into the landscape. I will never, he said, his voice trembling with something between awe and genuine fear, laugh at humanity again. Smith didn't smile. He offered a clean, unhurried salute. We appreciate that, Supreme Commander. His voice stayed level, cutting through the smoke-thick air. Now, if you'll excuse us, we've got a mess to clean up. Humanity doesn't like leaving a job unfinished. The galaxy had spent centuries believing war was an equation, solved by energy yields and superior technology. But on the mud-soaked, blood-drenched fields of Aegis Prime, the universe learned a different truth. War was an art form, and humanity, it turned out, were its undisputed masters.